Welcome into Outkick the Show. I'm your fearless leader, Clay Travis. Thursday edition of the program. I hope all of you are having fantastic days wherever you may be across this great country or this great land. My feet are freezing right now because I just turned over my entire glass of water. I don't know how there's so much liquid in one glass of water, but I'm sitting here in the ice cold trying to deal with frozen feet. In addition to the fact that I've been sick all week, this is quite the epic performance from your boy as we roll through the big stories of the day. As always, I'll be on Lock It In a little over an hour. We'll be breaking down everything in the world of sports and more. You can check that out on FS1 at 4:30 Eastern, 3:30 Central, 2:30 Mountain, 1:30 Pacific. But we began with the Astros on an unbelievably collapse of an apology. Let me just say this. I don't know how much gets paid for public relations and PR, but my general position is that PR people are all worse at their jobs than I am by myself. I think I could solve almost any PR crisis. I've felt this way for years. I feel like I should have Clay Travis PR, where I walk in, you give me all the details, I tell you exactly what to say and how to handle it. Here is what Jim Crane and the Astros should have said today. Here is Clay Travis PR handling this monstrous cheating scandal involving the Astros. I'd like to apologize to all the baseball fans out there for what we did in terms of stealing signals. Now, this is not going to surprise most of you, but throughout the history of baseball, there has been a strategy of trying to steal signals when you have runners on base to tip off your batter. This has been going on since the days of Ty Cobb, Babe Ruth, Lou Gehrig, as far back as you can go. What we did was we paired technology and modern day technology to such an extent that we crossed the line from gamesmanship to cheating, and in the process we cheated the game, and we should have done better, and now we're paying the penalty for what we did, and we deserve that penalty, and we deserve all of the negative comments and anger that we have provoked in baseball. We have to do better. Boom. There you go. I just nailed it. I didn't write it down. I didn't provide some script. I didn't memorize it. I told you directly what happened. I explained why we were guilty. I explained what we got wrong, right? Because I think this is what happened with the Astros. I think they took a history of baseball sign stealing to the next level and beyond thanks to modern day technology. And based on what I've read, they used Excel spreadsheets, they used video cameras, they relocated television monitors. They had them in the dugout. They were banging on trash cans to notify players as to what pitches to expect. All of that they did to cheat, right? They did it to cheat the game to make it more likely that they were going to win. Otherwise, everything that they did was worthless. Trying to argue that you didn't cheat the game when it's been readily apparent and proven that you did cheat the game is a defeated process, okay? You are not going to win that argument. So acknowledging that you allowed a historic trend of baseball, i.e. sign stealing, to accelerate beyond acceptable means based on your use of technology in a way that didn't exist in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, 50s, all those years, is, I think, an adequate response. And I think people would say, you know what, I can see how that happened. In your effort to get an edge, you took something that baseball teams had spent decades and generations doing it, and you took it beyond the point of acceptability by using modern day technology. I think most people would understand that. I think most people might not agree with it, but I think they would understand that explanation. In our zeal, in other words, from the Houston Astros, to win, we took something that had been going on for generations and we made it a different caliber of cheating. And I think people would have understood that. Arguing that what you did didn't have a beneficial effect or wasn't in any way cheating the game is wrong, and there's no defense for it. Also, this cheating was systematic. It was not just the GM. It was not just the manager. It was every player. The entire Houston Astros team was aware of the cheating that was going on. Everyone was getting tipped off on pitches. They had television monitors specifically installed near the dugout. They knew what they were doing was wrong. When you get caught, admit that you got caught, that you were in the wrong, and that you deserve the punishment that you got. And the fact that the Astros couldn't do that makes me wonder why they're likely paying somebody millions of dollars in PR. Millions of dollars in PR for that disaster. And we may have the clip to embed for a lot of you out there who are watching this on the short form as opposed to the full story. So those are my thoughts on the Astros. A couple of additional dramas that are unfolding right now in the NFL. The Carolina Panthers' new owner, David Tepper, was asked about his team's commitment to Cam Newton, and he said, "I'm not a doctor." Now, let me just circle back around for you for a minute. If your wife was sick and somebody came up to you and they said, "How's your wife doing? How's your marriage going?" And you said, "I don't know, I'm not a doctor," would that be a sign that the marriage was going well? If somebody walked up to your wife and they said, "Hey, how's your husband doing? How's he recovering from that surgery?" And they said, "I don't know, I'm not a doctor," would you be like, "Hey, that seems like a relationship that's going really well"? Somebody's injured, you're in a long-term relationship with them, they walk up, and that's the answer. If you go home for the holidays with your mom and your dad, and they're sitting around at Thanksgiving, and you say, "Mom, how's Dad's cancer going?" And your mom said, "I don't know, I'm not a doctor," you'd probably be like, "Mom wants Dad to die. This ain't looking good." If you said to your dad, "Hey, how is Mom's treatment for tuberculosis going?" And he said, "I don't know, I'm not a doctor," would you be like, "This seems like it's going really well"? When your answer to a question involving someone you're in a relationship with is, "I don't know, I'm not a doctor," it means you hope that that relationship is not going to continue much longer. If you are out to dinner with your Valentine's date, husband, wife, girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever it might be, and you're having an interesting conversation, and somebody asks you a question, and it requires maybe some bit of knowledge. "Do you think I should move this couch over to that other wall?" Men, I want you to try this. "I don't know, I'm not an architect." "I don't know, I'm not an interior designer." If you're about to get married and your wife says, "Do you like the chocolate cake or the vanilla cake better?" and you say, "I don't know, I'm not a wedding planner. I don't know, I don't make cakes for a living," let me tell you something. You are screwed, all right? "I don't know, I'm not a insert profession here" means that relationship is over, or it needs major counseling. The Carolina Panthers are moving on from Cam Newton, all right? All of this is true, all right? That's what David Tepper said. "I don't know, I'm not a doctor." How's Cam coming back from his surgery? Are you committed to him long term? "I don't know, I'm not a doctor." That means you do know, and you ain't committed to him long term. So what are the Panthers going to do? This morning on my radio show, I floated an interesting question. I floated an intriguing question. I said, Christian McCaffrey's coming up on his 4th year. Best running back in the NFL, in my opinion. He's going to expect to be paid more than any running back has ever been paid in the history of sports. Is it possible that you could move up in the draft to go get Tua from your current number 7 spot, number 7, to either number 1 or potentially number 3? If you gave the Detroit Lions Christian McCaffrey and your number 7 pick, would they give you their number 3 pick? I think the answer is probably yes. And then you could draft Tua, and you would have Matt Rule, and you would have a brand new quarterback to go with Joe Brady. Seems like it makes a lot of sense for the Carolina Panthers. If you really love Joe Burrow, and you went and got Joe Brady, who made him a superstar down at LSU, is it possible that you at least could call the Cincinnati Bengals and say, hey, Bengals, we'll give you Christian McCaffrey, the best running back in the NFL, and our 7th pick in exchange for the number 1 pick? That's a deal I would make. Some of you are saying you can't trade Christian McCaffrey. I disagree. Every player is expendable unless he is a franchise quarterback. If you are in love with Joe Burrow and you believe he is a franchise quarterback, you believe that he will start 16 years for you at quarterback and win you multiple Super Bowls, there is literally no price you can pay to get him that is too much. The same thing is true of Tua. Quarterbacks win championships. And if you can find one that is your starting quarterback for 15 or 16 years, whatever you give up for him is not going to be too much in the long run because you have him ensconced as your starter for the next 15 or 16 years. Which brings me to Matthew Stafford. 32-year-old Matthew Stafford. Rumors had started to circulate that maybe the Lions would make a choice at number 3 and go get a young quarterback. And it was an interesting debate. And then the Lions basically put the kibosh on this by saying, you know what, we're committed to Matthew Stafford, even though Kelly Stafford, his wife, said, you know what, she went on Instagram and said, I wouldn't mind staying in L.A., referencing the fact that the Chargers have an opening at quarterback. Instead, they're probably going to end up back in Detroit. This might well be the last year for Matthew Stafford with the Lions, but he would cost $35 million if they decided to cut bait with him. I think Matthew Stafford is a massively valuable asset. If you told me right now that Matthew Stafford was going to go to the New Orleans Saints, I would love it. If you told me right now that Matthew Stafford was going to go to the New England Patriots, I would love it. Matthew Stafford is probably the most underrated quarterback of his generation because the Detroit Lions are such an incompetent franchise that they have never been able to put a talented enough team around him to allow him to be able to win games. I believe that Matthew Stafford has top 10 in the NFL talent and has consistently had bottom 10 in the NFL talent for every season that he has played with the Lions, who have been a downright impossibly to function franchise. So I think there are a lot of places that he could go. Somebody just said he won nothing with Calvin Johnson. He's won about the same rate without Calvin Johnson. The reason why Calvin Johnson retired is the same reason why Barry Sanders retired. It's because they got so frustrated with the incompetence of the Lions that they said, I'm not willing to put up with this any longer. Same thing might be happening with Matthew Stafford. I wouldn't be surprised at all if he would love to play somewhere else for the final 5 or 6 years of his career. The Lions are a broken franchise. Everything they do always fails. They are not a well-run team. Matthew Stafford might have one more year in Detroit, but I would be at least contemplating, if I were the Lions, trying to find a way to move on beyond Matthew Stafford and get some value for him in the meantime. I'd love to see Matthew Stafford, who is from Dallas, Texas, actually get to play behind that Dallas Cowboy offensive line. I would love to see Matthew Stafford, who is from Dallas, Texas, actually get to hand off to Ezekiel Elliott, who would be immediately the best running back that he's ever had. Can you imagine what Matthew Stafford would be able to accomplish with a high-end defense and with an incredibly talented offense around him? I think, again, he is the most underrated quarterback of his generation. So those are two interesting storylines. The Panthers with Cam, they're done, I believe. The Lions with Matthew Stafford, maybe they have 1 year left with him. Been a big debate all over social media. You guys may have seen it about whether or not seats should recline. A guy in the back row of a seat was constantly hitting the seat in front of him when we had a situation with a woman deciding to recline the seat. Here is what I believe. In general, I'm not a guy who believes in absolutes. I think there's usually nuance. I think instead of black and white, there's usually gray. I believe this. Every single person who reclines their seats is the equivalent of an airplane sadomasochist enforcing their constricted worldview on the rest of us who bear the onus of their reclines. I say this as a man who is 6 foot and has regularly been on airlines when tiny people, either kids or women, people who recline their seats and are so small they can't even have their feet touch the ground in front of them, feel the need to take over my space and slam their seats right back into me. As I often am sitting attempting to write on my laptop to make a living and make this capitalistic society as great as possible. Boom! Comes sliding back some 5'2" woman reclining her seat who has plenty of space already and feels the need to take over my space. My move in general is to go with the knee right in the small of the back. Make them absolutely miserable throughout. I believe the number one thing that airlines could do to make their airplanes better is not allow seats to recline at all. Because if you recline, you create a systemic effect where everyone else feels compelled to either be miserable or recline their seats themselves. It's like the ignoramus who stands up at the stadium and is the only person standing up, and then 10 people have to stand up behind them, when if he just sat down in his seat, everything would be perfect. You are enforcing your worldview on others and making other people more miserable. I oftentimes, if I'm getting on a seat on Southwest late, I will make a choice based on whether I think the person is a recliner or not. Because the minute they say that you can put down tray tables and somebody reclines their seat, I hate them. You don't sleep any better. It's not like you're getting a full recline. I don't buy into it being beneficial in any way, except it absolutely ruins the experience of anybody who's a decent size that's trying to go on an airplane. And I say this as a guy who's 6 foot, 180 pounds. I honestly can't even imagine if I were like 6'5", 250 or 260, or God forbid even bigger. It would be awful. All right. Here is my final thoughts. I think we can probably put this video in if you guys haven't seen it. I've tweeted it out so you can go check it out. Did you see the viral video from the University of Virginia Multicultural Center? If you saw it, say yes in the comments. If you saw this video, say yes in the comments. It was and is absolutely an affront to anyone who believes in a society that should be entirely egalitarian. Everybody should be treated equally. All right? This is important. Like, some of the stuff we talk about is frivolous. In fact, often, very many times it is. But this undergrad student at UVA, they opened a new multicultural center, and we'll put the video in for those of you who have not seen it, but a huge percentage of you have seen it. And a lot of you sent the video to me, so thank you for making me aware of things that otherwise I might not see. This girl gets up, and she announces to the room that there are too many white people in the Multicultural Center, and that they are making black people feel uncomfortable because they don't want to be surrounded by that many white people. They have other places on the campus they can go. I like to argue, and I think it's very often true. We talk about the political spectrum a lot, but I think very often the political spectrum is actually a circle. And I think if you contemplate the way that totalitarian regimes work, fascists and communists actually end up in many of the same places, even though they represent opposite ends of the political spectrum. And I think the same thing often happens in the arguments that people make. That woman, that undergrad, young black woman, is actually making the same argument to that multicultural center that was made by racist white people in the 1950s who were demanding segregated schools. George Wallace standing in front of the schoolhouse doors of Alabama saying segregation now, segregation in the future, segregation forever, whatever the hell he said in that argument when Alabama went to integrated school. The argument in favor of segregation, in favor of separate but equal, in favor of separate water fountains, separate swimming pools, separate schools, was that the races should be separate and that everybody should have their own particular location in American society. The argument in favor of integration is that we should all come together and be able, as multiculturalists, to embrace diversity and difference and be able to share things together. Indeed, the entire argument for a diverse school and college is predicated on the idea that instead of ending up in a silo surrounded by people who are exactly like you and have the same worldviews and the same opinions, you should be, in college in particular, but hopefully in high school and younger ages as well, you should be exposed to people who think differently than you. Because if you are exposed to people who think differently than you, it makes your intellectual life more vivid and more exponentially powerful and expansive than it otherwise would be. And I try to guard against this all the time. This siloing of thought, so you're only surrounded by people who agree with you all day long. That's why I read the New York Times cover to cover, even if I disagree with some of it, and the Wall Street Journal cover to cover every day, so that I can have conflicting opinions presented to me every day and have to decide which one I agree with. It's like being a judge in your own life, because ultimately, all of life boils down to decision making. Ultimately, the more money you make and the more power you accrue, in general, the better you are at decision making. Whether you are a football coach or a CEO of a company or a principal of a school, you are being rewarded for looking at a variety of information and consistently making the best choice when presented with options. That's really what leaders do. They have all the options ideally presented to them, and they make the best choice. What I am seeing happen increasingly in society is people go into their own silos, and they are so historically inept in this country that they aren't even aware of the irony that our current colleges and universities are allowing students to adopt the same arguments that segregationists espoused in 1950, but instead of it being white people who are making those arguments, it's often now people of color, minorities. They are arguing for the same thing that the George Wallaces of the world were arguing. And colleges aren't doing a good job of explaining to those kids why they are wrong. I don't blame that girl for having a stupid and ignorant opinion, because lots of us, when we went off to college or high school, or even after that, had stupid and ignorant opinions, because ignorant means that you're uneducated. It means that you aren't aware of the larger societal stances in which your opinions are rooted. That girl has been taught that her opinion is appropriate, that it's perfectly okay to tell white people, I don't want you around me, and it's not considered racist. Whereas white kids have all been taught in an integrated society the idea that you would stand up in a public place and say, hey, this is a white space, we don't want anybody else of any color around in public on video. The white person who said that would get expelled within a couple of hours of it going out virally on the internet. There would be protests. This would be a huge story all over the University of Virginia. So my question for you is this. If we can't have established standards in college for all people, regardless of their racial, ethnic, religious, sexual orientation, we are not a society of rules or laws. We are a society of identities, and everybody gets to pick and choose what rules apply to them. What often triggers and upsets people about what I say is I apply an even standard. You may not like it, but if you go and look at every opinion that I've ever had, it's pretty much race blind, it's pretty much religion blind, it's pretty much sexuality blind. It is trying to establish a basic standard of behavior that is acceptable in the country, and then applying it evenly regardless of the identity of the person involved, regardless of the background of the person involved. And what troubles me is this circular nature of where we end up. The arguments that that girl made at the University of Virginia are similar to the arguments that an ignorant white student would have made in the 1950s. The difference is that opinion in the 1950s is not allowed, that a white person might have had, because we have all agreed that a segregated society is not a society that we want to live in as a nation. Why would we then allow a new form of segregation to develop by choice based on minorities endorsing the same opinions that would have existed in the 1950s South? And before that, certainly. This is a big issue going forward, and it's not political to me. It's not, again, it's a circle. It's not in any way related to a political party. But we need to have people stand out and make statements about what is and what is not acceptable. And what that girl said at the University of Virginia is not acceptable in society, no matter who the race is of the person who is saying it. And I hope you guys, when we clip this and share it, will share it with your friends and think about it. We are retroactively going back in time. This is a 2020 opinion, which is considered to be so advanced by the social justice warriors among us, who, if they actually read a history book, they will argue and recognize that they are actually embracing the exact same arguments that were made in racist 1950s America and in 1910s America and 1920s and 30s and 40s America. The reason to go to college with people of different backgrounds is to be exposed to opinions that are different than your own, so that your own opinions can be challenged, that you can become smarter about them, and maybe that you will evolve on those opinions. I find it incredibly frustrating when people don't look at all the evidence and adjust their opinions based on that evidence. It's what I do every single day. I appreciate all of you. My name is Clay Travis. This is Outkick the Show. DBAP unless you need to SBAP. My name is Clay Travis, and this show is called Outkick the Show. I'll be on FS1 in a little bit. Kisses to all of you. Have great Thursdays. My name is Clay Travis, like I said, and I'll see you guys tomorrow. DBAP unless you need to SBAP. Love you. Thank you, Facebook. See y'all.